Hey everybody, it's the Bald Man once again, and I'm here to give you another lesson, this time on the loanable funds graph and also crowding out, one of the effects of deficit spending. But before we get there, let's talk about our loanable funds graph. We need to make sure we're using real interest rates. You can see this. You can probably see this is a simple supply and demand graph, right? We have the supply of loanable funds, demand of loanable funds, and quantity of loanable funds. Word of warning: sometimes this is referred to as the private savings graph. So you might see PS instead of LF, but it means the same thing. So basically, I'm just going to talk about the shifters for the demand of loanable funds. The supply, well, we don't really need to know it, but the shifters for the demand of loanable funds are more important, so that is what we will talk about today. And to help us remember what the shifters are, there is an acronym we want to be able to use, and that acronym is FADE. So the F in FADE stands for foreign exchange. People will borrow a lot of money and go buy foreign currency in the hopes that that foreign currency, they'll buy the foreign currency when it's cheap, by the way, and they'll wait for the foreign currency to get stronger before they sell it off and make money that way. George Soros is a big proponent of that. He does that all the time. The A stands for all borrowing, lending, and credit. So any borrowing, lending, or credit that's happening will also affect our demand of loanable funds. The D is the most important one. This is the one we'll be using in class more often, because the D stands for deficit spending. Deficit spending. This is, of course, when we spend money we do not have. So how do we spend money we don't have? We come to the loanable funds market and we borrow it. And last but not least, we have expectations for the future. Expectations for the future. Now, I will say this before we move on to crowding out. Regardless of which of the shifters we're thinking about right now, right? Let's just talk about deficit spending. When the government comes and they borrow money, they're not just going to borrow thousands of dollars. They're probably not even going to borrow millions of dollars. They might want to borrow billions of dollars, right? So we would expect that the demand for loanable funds would be affected, and you would have no objection whatsoever from me for that. However, since they're borrowing billions of dollars, they're also affecting the supply of loanable funds as well. So the supply of loanable funds could decrease as well. Now, guys, do not put both. Pick one or the other. Either one is correct, right? We're either going to be increasing the demand for loanable funds, or we'll be decreasing the supply of loanable funds. And either way, we wind up with a higher interest rate, right? So whenever we have deficit spending and they ask you to graph out what exactly happened in the loanable funds graph, you can either increase the demand for loanable funds or, decrease the supply of loanable funds. Why? Well, in either case, we will see that increase in real interest rates, and that is all we are worried about. Now, let's see how the loanable funds graph works with the aggregate demand, aggregate supply graph, and then talk about crowding out. All right, as you can see, we have an aggregate demand and aggregate supply graph that is in a recession, and we're also looking at a loanable funds graph. Now, we need to find a way to bring aggregate demand up so we can come back to full employment And of course, since we're talking about the government, there are only two tools to their disposal in fiscal policy, and that is taxing and spending. In this case, we're going to disregard taxing and stick with spending. So the government is going to attempt to spend their way out of this recession. So they're going to come to the loanable funds market and they're going to borrow a lot of money. And that's going to increase real interest rates. They're going to turn around and take this money. I'm sorry about that. They're going to take this money and turn around and spend it. And they're going to bring us back to equilibrium. And the economy is going to be fixed forever and ever. Amen. Nothing ever is going to go wrong ever again, and we will be happy forever. This is not what's going to happen, guys. Why do I say that? Well, you may have noticed that real interest rates have increased. And interest rates are going to affect consumer spending. And not just consumer spending, they're going to affect gross business investment. The higher the interest rates, the less small businessmen are going to be willing to borrow so they can invest in their business, and the less consumers are going to be willing to borrow money at high interest to borrow a car, to buy a house, to pay for college, what have you. They're going to be less willing to borrow money at that price. So what is going to happen? Well, since consumer spending and gross business investment is a component of aggregate demand, we will see aggregate demand decrease once again. Right? So aggregate demand is going to decrease. Now, we are better off than we were originally, but we are not at full employment. We are not where we want to be. We are short of our economic goal. And what just happened, guys, this is what we call the crowding out effect. Right? The government came in and borrowed a lot of money so they could fix the economy. Well, by borrowing that money to fix the economy, they also raised interest rates too high for small business people and regular consumers to want to borrow money. So they will stop borrowing money, and that in effect will affect aggregate demand, causing a decrease, and that bounce back is what we call the crowding out effect. If you guys have any questions about anything I talked about today, please drop a comment down below or send me a message on Remind.